Got everybody in? I believe so. All right. My cell phone says it's 6 o'clock, so we'll get started. I'm sure we'll have more folks ambling in and probably several more folks coming in online over the next 15 minutes or so. That's why our agenda, which is up on the table here, has sort of a 15-minute welcome session. So I'm going to just babble for a little bit while we wait for people to arrive. Thank you all for being here. First and foremost, those of you online and here in the room. Actually, before I say anything further, could somebody online unmute themselves and confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh,
Yes.
Thank you, Annette. Appreciate it. All right, excellent. So thanks again for being here. My name is Alex Weinhagen. I'm with the Vermont Land Use Review Board. We are the board that oversees the state's Act 250 programs. With me tonight is Brooke Dingledine at the computer, helping our online folks. Brooke is also a board member. We're a 5-member board that oversees the Act 250 program. The other 3 members who are participating in these meetings, but in other locations over the last few days, are Janet Hurley, who's our chair. Janet represents Southern Vermont. She worked in Bennington County for a very long time and lives down that way. Kirsten Sultan is another of our 5 board members. Kirsten lives up in the Kingdom in Linden. And Sarah Hadd, who is from Franklin County, St. Albans. So those are the 5 of us. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself, just again to stall while we're waiting for folks to arrive. I grew up in Essex Junction. I am not supposed to be doing this work. I went to school to be a wildlife biologist and started doing that. Went to Michigan for a couple of years to test the waters. It was too damn flat, so came home. And there were no Fish and Wildlife Department biologists retiring, and I didn't want to kill any of them because they were nice guys for the most part. So shifted gears and started doing community planning. I raised my family in Westford, which is sort of the Northeast Kingdom of Chittenden County, if you can imagine that. And closer to now, relocated to Burlington.
Hello.
And in the process, got my start in community planning. So after working with the town of Westford for a little bit, Heinsberg's snatched me up. Heinsberg is on the south side of Chittenden County. Feels a little bit more like Addison County than Chittenden County, but similar in size to Windsor, population-wise, has a nice village area like Windsor. And worked in Heinsberg, helping them figure out what they wanted to be when they grew up for about 22 years. I was their town planner for that time frame. They have not grown up yet, but they're working on it. And in January of this year, was appointed by the governor to serve on this land use review board, along with Brooke and the other 3 members that I mentioned. So that's my background. Wildlife biology is actually my academic training, but I haven't done that in so long, it feels like another life. And mostly what I've done is help landowners work through the local level development review process in Heinsberg, both large and small, and work with our planning commission in that town and the regional planning commission to update the vision for the community and try to do that balance at the local level between meeting facilitation, neighbor dispute mediation, and sometimes a little planning in between. Brooke, do you want to say a few words about your background so people know where you come from? I can handle letting people in while you're chatting.
I want to keep people out.
Yep.
So I am an attorney and worked for the Central Vermont law firm of Ellison, Giacomo, DeTorrent, and McQuestion for almost 30 years until I decided after practicing Act 250 law for 30 years that I would see if I could help on the board for the new land use review board and all of the tasks that are now in front of our board and our program. My background is in the trenches, helping people, all of the different participants. So I have represented companies and developers, large and small. I have represented neighbors, and I've also represented a number of municipalities before Act 250, the Environmental Division, as well as before the Public Utility Commission on energy cases and telecommunications towers. So I bring a broad perspective. I think that I can identify and understand from my prior life and practice different perspectives on all of the tasks that we have ahead of us, the administration of Act 250, because for me, it's about a level playing field for everyone and to make sure that Act 250 works and is accessible. So there are many changes in front of us, and my desire is to make sure that this board, and they seem all committed to really listening to Vermonters to make sure that what we're charged with doing and implementing is the right fit for all of our rural as well as our urban areas. So that's my commitment, is to listen and try to make sure that there's equity and that people are heard and responded to the best that we can.
Thanks, Brooke. So real quickly, the other three board members, so there are three planners on the board. Myself, Janet Hurley, who's our chair, was a regional planner, like I mentioned, out in Bennington, previously did municipal planning like myself. Sarah Had was actually a town administrator for the last few years, but prior to that was a municipal planner like myself and in Colchester. And Kirsten Sultan is sort of our ace in the pocket. She was a district coordinator for the Act 250 program up in the Kingdom for many years. And so she's the one person who was elevated by the governor to serve on this oversight board from within the program itself. And prior to serving as a district coordinator, she was a civil engineer. So she brings that skill set to the board. So a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into a presentation. First, for those of you that are in the room, if you haven't been here and you need to use a bathroom, go out the door and take a left. It's down the hall that way. For those of you online, when we get to the questions and comments section, we're going to have folks use the raise hand feature, which on your screen looks a lot like a little hand. It's up on the upper toolbar. So when we get there, raise your hand and then we'll recognize you. At that point, you can unmute yourself, which is the icon that looks like a microphone, so that we can hear you. For now, I would appreciate it if all of you that are online could keep yourselves muted so that we don't have feedback and odd sounds going on, and then we'll go from there. Microsoft Teams is the platform we're using for all of you online, and I know it was new to me when I started this job. So if you have any issues with Microsoft Teams, the agenda for this meeting, which is on our website, hopefully those of you online, had access to that. You can certainly get access to that at act250.gov. The second page of the agenda has some tips on using Microsoft Teams, including the raise hand feature, unmuting, and there's information on the agenda on the first page with a telephone number. So if those of you online have trouble and just can't make the technology work, there is a phone number that you can call into this meeting and talk to us that way. So I just want to make sure you have those helpful hints. So with that said, our agenda for tonight, there are copies of it up here. It's very straightforward. I'm going to give you a presentation so everybody has an understanding of what the heck we're here for and what our board has been working on. And then we'll save the bulk of the meeting for your questions and your comments about what we're doing. Any logistical questions before I dive into a pretty PowerPoint presentation, either in the room or online? Oh, thanks, Brooke. Yes, so you are being recorded. We're making these recordings available on our website after the meetings. So just know that that's happening. I don't know what to tell you if you're not comfortable with that. You might want to leave, but hopefully you are. We will be, in addition to the recording, we'll be doing a written summary that's hopefully a little faster and easier for folks to read than watching a 2-hour meeting. And all of that will be posted to our website, the Tier 3 page, which I'll show you momentarily. All right, if there aren't any other logistical matters, I will dive right in. Hold on while I share my screen. Brooke, I guess it's big enough for the audience in-house, but if there's a way you can keep your participants tab open so you can let people in, but maybe shrink it a little bit, will it give you that option? That's about all you get. Okay, that's fine. I think folks can see.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
big enough to read.
Excellent. All right, so again, thanks for being here. Again, my name is Alex Weinhagen with the Land Use Review Board. We are the 5-member board that oversees the state's Act 250 program. This is our 4th in a series of public engagement sessions to talk about this new concept of Tier 3 areas, Tier 3 jurisdiction. So first, a little primer on Act 250. It is Vermont's statewide development review system. Most development in Vermont is reviewed at the municipal level, at the local level. That's why we have zoning regulations. That's where most of it occurs. But over 55 years ago, after some pretty questionable development in some ski areas, the state created a parallel process that runs separately from the municipal development review process in order to make sure that larger developments happened, but didn't happen at the expense of our natural resources and our state. That's the Act 250 program. What you see on screen are some of the purposes of that program that were tweaked and adjusted a couple of years ago as a part of the reform effort. It is a program that seeks to balance economic development and housing with the maintenance of our landscape. Vermont is not like other places in the country, obviously. And Act 250 is designed to keep Vermont, while allowing for development to go through, just ensuring that there's a proper review process for it and that we get good design and not sprawl, not any place USA. Act 250 is a citizen-based review process. Our 5-member board does not review development applications. That's not our function. Our program has 9 district commissions that are regional around the state. There are volunteers that serve on those district commissions. They're appointed by the governor. So they function very much like a municipal level development review board or planning commission that reviews developments. So they hear applications and they issue decisions on them. And as a part of their process, sometimes they take comments from interested parties. So most of us think of the Act 250 review process as an applicant has a project. They go work with a staff member from our program who says, yep, you need an Act 250 permit for that. They submit an application. There's a hearing, lots of contention, neighbors come out, the district commission renders a decision, and it goes on from there. That is the process for major projects. However, the vast majority of projects that are reviewed through the Act 250 process go through what's called a minor review system. There's no public hearing. There's no appeal after the fact because nobody lodged a complaint. And what happens in those cases is that the applicant submits an application, our district coordinator reviews it, drafts an approval with the district commission, circulates it to interested parties and says, we're going to approve this thing. We're going to put some conditions on it. Does anybody have an issue? And if you do, we'll hold a public hearing. If you don't, it's going to be approved. That's the vast majority of Act 250 applications, how they're processed. So they're divided up into these 3 categories: major projects that go through a full public hearing process, minor projects of the type I just described, and administrative amendments for very simple changes to existing Act 250 permits. Those don't even go before our district commissions. If they're minor, our district coordinators can approve them and get them figured out quickly. With that said, Act 250 was designed to allow for citizen input. And so the reason why everyone is made aware of projects is to make sure that there's an avenue for neighbors and other interested parties to be involved in the process. It is not like a more generic agency of natural resources permit that you would get here in Vermont. Like, I need to put in a septic system. Okay, I need a wastewater permit from the state. That permitting process is super important, but does not involve any sort of public hearing or citizen review. It's not, those permits aren't adjudicated by a citizen board the way Act 250 is. Similar with, let's say you want to have a new curb cut onto a state highway. You got to go to the Vermont Agency of Transportation and get a permit for that. That's an administrative permit. It's handled in-house. Those permitting processes are very different from Act 250, which is meant to be more citizen-based. The review process itself is driven by 10 review criteria. And again, this differentiates it from just sort of administrative permits like wastewater or curb cuts. It is a comprehensive review process. So everything from, do you have adequate water, wastewater, to, are you going to blow up our schools and make it so that our schools can't handle the level of students that are coming in from your development, to what is your impact on the transportation system around the project? Those are just a few of the 10 criteria that get reviewed for projects. There are lots of sub-criteria within these 10. I won't go over them all, but these are the basic 10 criteria that Act 250 projects are reviewed under. So what projects actually have to go through Act 250? It's not all development in the state. In fact, it's very little development in the state. For the 55 years that Act 250 has been in place, it's very much been focused on larger, more impactful developments. And so as you can see from this slide, which is sort of the jurisdiction as we know it today, you're building more than 10 housing units, you need an Act 250 permit. You're doing a subdivision of property in a community that doesn't have its own local regulations, and it's more than 6 lots, you need an Act 250 permit. You're doing commercial development. Let's say you want to open up an auto body shop on your property and you're in a town that does have zoning. Well, if your parcel is more than 10 acres, you need an Act 250 permit. For commercial development, it's actually tied to the size of the lot, the parcel. Or for a ski state, you're above 2,500 feet. Most development above 2,500 feet requires an Act 250 permit. So this is the sort of large project or large-ish project jurisdiction that has been the hallmark of Act 250 for a long time. In 2024, the legislature decided to change that. And they decided to make a whole bunch of reforms to the Act 250 program, including jurisdictional changes. So one of the non-jurisdictional changes they made was to eject the former Natural Resources Board and create a 5-member land use review board. Each of us is a full-time board member. This is our job. We're not working another job and doing this on the night, in the evenings like a planning commissioner might. And we all had to pass muster with regard to our professional credentials. So that was one of the changes that Act 181, which was the reform bill, affected. And the reason that they did that and invested in that was because there are a lot of reforms happening, and it's going to require work to get them done. So I won't go over all of them. I'll mention that Brooke, in particular, is our lead board member working on a study and a report to the legislature that's due in just a couple of weeks on how to help reform the appeals process for Act 250. And this may actually touch a little bit of municipal appeals of municipal zoning decisions as well. So that's one of the Act 181 charges, is for us to make recommendations on that front. We held a public hearing last week to get input on that. We're still formulating the final draft. If that intrigues you, talk to Brooke afterwards or contact her in the next week or so. We submitted a wood products manufacturing report to the legislature earlier this year, in which we made recommendations on how to make it easier for sawmills and other wood products companies to get through the Act 250 process, which ones should be exempt, which ones should go through an expedited review. And so we're hoping that the legislature in this next session will take those recommendations and the ones we're formulating for the appeals process and consider them and maybe change statute further. But for tonight's purposes, we're really here to talk about Tier 3 and Act 250 jurisdiction. And the basic changes that they made to Act 250 on that level are twofold. First, they reinstituted an old rule that used to be around 20 years ago with Act 250 related to road construction. So this new rule that takes effect July 1st of next year says that regardless of how big your project is, if you're building more than 800 feet of new road or 2,000 feet of combined new road and new driveway, you need an Act 250 permit. And the problem that they were seeking to address with that new jurisdictional trigger was the fragmentation of interior forests. Think of it as sort of death by 1,000 cuts, right? Act 250 for a long time was focused on large developments, more than 10 housing units, more than 6 or 10 lots in a subdivision. And there was plenty of development happening underneath that threshold, and a fair amount of it happening in the middle of interior forested areas.
Can I call you at 8?
Just hit, and that will take care of that. So that death by 1,000 cuts has been happening over the last 50 years. And I'm sure some of you have seen that as you've driven around the landscape. Like, how did they get that house way up there? That must be a really long driveway. So this new road construction jurisdictional provision is meant to say, okay, if you're punching a road way into that sort of area, we want you to go through a review, and hopefully we can get some better design in terms of how the water runs off that very long driveway and what resources are being impacted way far away into the middle of that forest area. So that was one major change to jurisdiction, and that goes into effect July 1st. That's not what we're here to talk about tonight, but a lot of these sessions, people have wanted to talk about that. So I don't want to hide it from you, and we're happy to talk about it. But the other jurisdictional change has to do with these tier areas, Tier 3 being one. So imagine Vermont, and you have 3 colors on your paint palette. You paint our downtowns and villages one color. They're all spread out across Vermont, but they occupy a pretty small area. You paint the most sensitive natural resources in the state another color. Again, think of that as being kind of a small area, but they're all over the place. Those are the Tier 3 areas. And then Tier 2, your third color, it's the rest of the state. It's most of the state. In Tier 1 areas, we want to reduce Act 250 permitting or eliminate it entirely. So these are areas that are planned for growth. They are in municipalities that have regulations to govern that growth. And in those areas, we want to take our foot off the brake and green light development as properly managed by the municipalities. So that's Tier 1. In Tier 3 areas, we're doing the opposite. We're saying these are the most sensitive natural resource areas. Almost any, or at least most development in these critical areas should be properly designed and go through an Act 250 review process. So there's a little bit of a yin and yang with those two. And like I said, Tier 2 is going to be the bulk of the state, and that's jurisdiction as we know it, plus the road rule. What I do want to say about Tier 3, which is what we're really here to talk about tonight, is that the areas that I'm going to show you on the maps, these are not, this is not a prohibition on development. These are not areas where you cannot develop. Development will be allowed in these areas. That's the whole point of identifying them, to say if there is development, it should be reviewed and there should be good design, should be held up against the Act 250 criteria. So just so we dispel that notion right away, I think there's been a lot of angst across the state about, especially in rural communities, about, hey, our town doesn't have a big downtown area. Most of our town is very rural and forested. Is it all going to be Tier 3 and every project, anything that somebody wants to do will require an Act 250 permit? The answer is no, that's not the case. But we have mapped some areas and we're looking for feedback. So before I show you the map, I just want to tell you about how we arrived at the areas that we mapped. So the reform legislation compelled us to form a working group of experts and representatives from a lot of different industries. And so we have a 25-member working group that's been meeting since May, and they've been talking about tier 3 and where these areas are and what the rules regarding jurisdiction of those areas should look like. The legislature told us we needed to look at the first 6 resource areas that are on this slide, starting with river corridors, headwater streams. It told us we should look at anything else that's sensitive as well, and so we did. We looked at a total of 17 resource areas that you see on the slide. In the end, we selected 5, a couple of which are sort of nested within each other, so it's really 3. But I'll tell you more about how we did that and what they are, but I want you to understand that the folks at the table to help us do this, it was not just Brooke, myself, and the other 3 board members. The 25 members of the working group included a representative from the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, representative from the Vermont Realtors Association, representatives from the 3 major branches of the Agency of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife, Forest Parks and Recreation, Water Quality. It also included some a citizen group and an environmental group. It included ecologists, independent from the Agency of Natural Resources, and consultants that actually work in the Act 250 arena, helping applicants and landowners get through that process. So it was a pretty diverse working group, and that's how we helped. That's how we looked at this list and winnowed it down. So how did we winnow it down? Here's a few examples specifically. River corridors. First item the legislature said we had to consider. Turns out the same year that Act 181, the reform effort, passed, the Flood Safety Act passed by the legislature, which requires the Agency of Natural Resources to stand up a river corridor specific permitting program. So why would we have Act 250 take jurisdiction over development in river corridors when there's a permit program designed to do exactly that? We're not going to. That's why we kicked that off the list. Interior forest blocks. Vermont is mostly forested, and interior forest is a special kind of habitat for critters and for the ecology of our place. But as it's been mapped, it occupies over 75% of the state. It was our feeling that tier 3 areas needed to be targeted, needed to be circumscribed, and that we did not want development in 75% of Vermont to have to get an Act 250 permit. So we said, we have to do better. We have to drill down deeper into what facet of that area should we focus on, if any. And so we kicked out forest blocks. Rare, threatened, and endangered species. When I first started on this with a wildlife background, I said to myself, well, of course we're going to have those areas as tier 3. Turns out, statewide mapping of rare, threatened, and endangered species location is extremely incomplete and oftentimes very dated. And so one of our criteria for including a resource in tier 3 was that we had to have decent mapping of it statewide. We couldn't be looking at just a small percentage of the universe of that resource. And so we kicked out rare, threatened, and endangered species locations. Thankfully, there is already a law in the books that prevents takings of those kinds of species. So there is some protection already. And with interior forest blocks, as I mentioned, with this other jurisdictional trigger, this road construction provision, there will be Act 250 review if there's development deep into an interior forest block. So those are just a few specific examples of how and why we kicked out many of the resources that we considered. This is what we landed with.
Alex, I think you missed the riparian areas in your description.
Intentionally, Morgan. Intentionally, but thank you. Yes, riparian areas were important to us, and our recommendation is going to be that they be addressed through that river corridor permitting process that ANR is standing up in a couple of years. So the 3 that we landed on. Okay, so I'm happy to take one more comment, but I would appreciate it if you just hold your questions and then we'll take them in just a minute or two, because I think some of the questions might be answered with the presentation. But Carolyn, if you want to clarify something, go ahead.
Well, we can cue me for the question part.
Okay, very good. We'll go to you first. So the three tier 3 areas that we landed on were significant natural communities, headwater stream areas, and habitat connectors. And I'll walk you through each of them. Just know that on the prior slide, there were 17 and 5 of them were highlighted. Well, headwater stream areas sort of sweeps in several of those, which is why we went from 5 to 3. So what is a significant natural community? These are areas across the state that Fish and Wildlife, the Department of Fish and Wildlife maps. These are boots on the ground mapping efforts. They're on both public and private land with landowner permission. And they are targeted to identify the most representative types of our ecology that repeat themselves in patterns across the state. So think of any natural area that you like to go walk in or hike in. Every natural portion of this state is a natural community of some sort, right? It's a northern hardwood forest. It's a spruce fir bog. It's a dry mesic pine forest area. There are many of them. I don't pretend to know all of them. But every part of the state is some sort of natural community. What Vermont Fish and Wildlife has done is pick out just the most representative ones, the ones that do a good job of representing that type, and then they rank them in terms of their rarity across the state on a scale of 1 to 5. And so for this process, they suggested that we consider only the very rare and rare significant natural community types because they feel like they have a pretty good handle on the universe of those. Not as good a handle on the more common types that are spread out across the state. And so this draft of the tier 3 rules includes very rare and rare significant natural communities of upland types. And by that, I mean many of these natural communities are wetland types. And as many of you know, Vermont has a pretty stringent wetland rule and permitting process. And so just like with the river corridors analysis, we felt it doesn't make sense to regulate through Act 250 significant natural communities that are wetlands because they're regulated through another permit process with ANR. So we sort of winnowed the list down to just those types. Headwater stream areas. So these areas, a headwater stream is a stream that's sort of in the upper reaches of where it starts. There are very few streams that flow into it. It is the beginning of the watershed. When we started this work, I thought headwater streams, perfect, great tier 3 resource, so much flooding over the last few years. Everybody's aware and cognizant that we got to be managing what comes off the hillsides better. Turns out that we have so many streams, 20,000 miles of map streams alone, that approximately 90% of the state is in a headwater stream area. So that wasn't going to work for a tier 3 designation. So we decided to focus in on just the most sensitive portions of those headwater stream areas. So we overlapped them with these 3 attributes, and only places that met all of these were put into this draft of the tier 3 work. So headwater stream areas that have extremely steep slopes of 35% or greater, that are on poorly drained soils, where when it rains, the water doesn't infiltrate, just runs right off, and at elevations between 1,200 feet and 2,500 feet. Understanding that gravity matters, and the higher you are up in the watershed, the more damage that runoff can do as it makes its way down to the lowlands. The reason we stopped at 2,500 feet is because, as I explained before, most development above 2,500 feet requires an Act 250 permit and has for 50 plus years. So this is how we skinny down the headwater stream areas to go from 90% of the state to about 2. Similarly, habitat connectors. Vermont Fish and Wildlife, through the Vermont Conservation Design Program, has mapped habitat blocks across the state using aerial imagery and this really cool technology called LiDAR, where planes go over and send pulses down to the ground that rebound back to the plane and tell you where the tree canopy is and where the ground is. So you can map where forests are at a very high resolution. So they took that data, And much of Vermont is forested, right? So they wanted to come up with a prioritization of which patches are most important to allow wildlife and plants to move across the landscape. And by landscape, I don't mean just Vermont. I mean the entire northern forest, of which Vermont is sort of a linchpin between the Adirondacks and the White Mountains and Quebec and northern Maine. And so what you see on the left side are the highest priority and priority connectivity blocks from the Vermont Conservation Design data set. In darker orange are the highest priority, in lighter yellow are the priority. And as you can see, especially the darker orange forms a network that would allow wildlife and plants to move across Vermont in the face of climate change, in the face of local regional extirpation of a species or a population in one region. Maybe there's a disease and they all died, can be repopulated. So that was the intent. But again, it covered over 60% of the state. That's not going to work for a tier 3 designation. So we worked with Fish and Wildlife to come up with a plan and a rubric to skinny that down. And we were able to get it down to about 6%. That's the average. It runs between 5 and 8 of the state. And we did that by focusing on those dark orange areas only. So you should know that we set aside all of the yellow areas, the priority connectivity blocks. We said they're important, but we're going to leave them alone for now. We're going to focus on just the most important blocks in orange. And where are forest and habitat blocks typically bisected? At the road. And so Fish and Wildlife has a separate data set, very cool data set, that they did with remote technology again, where they went down roads in 100-foot segments and analyzed how much forest vegetation was on either side of each of those segments. And if it was more than 75% forested on both sides, it got a high priority as a potential habitat or crossing because there's cover for critters to, get close to the road and then cross. And if it was a parking lot on one side and a cornfield on the other, it got a very low priority. So we took the highest priority road segments from that analysis, married it with the highest priority connectivity blocks, and identified road segments or corridors where we feel like those are the most important places for critters to actually transition between these blocks and move across the landscape. So by doing that, we were able to get it down to a more reasonable area. So in total, under this draft, we're looking at about 5 to 9% of the state in the tier 3 mapping that we have right now. You can see the breakdown within those 3 different types, significant natural communities, the headwater stream areas, and the habitat connectors. The real variable in this, in this draft, is the habitat connectors. Because interior forests are largely going to be jurisdictional under the road construction provision that I mentioned, and because that road construction provision is tied to 800 feet of new road or 2,000 feet of combined road and driveway, we are using an 800-foot road buffer for these habitat connectors and a 2,000-foot road buffer, and we haven't figured out which one is the right one to use yet. So that's why there's variability. We're still open to suggestions, and maybe there's a different number or distance away that makes sense. Part of the reform effort was a requirement that we don't get in the way of growth and development in the places where we want it to happen. That those are the tier 1 areas, and we struggled with ways to make sure that didn't happen. And right now, as of this draft, this anticipates a pretty large-scale exemption or exclusion of any area that's within a center, a planned growth area, or yikes, I forgot the 4th one. But we have 4 future land use areas that the regional planning commissions are mapping around our downtowns and centers, neighborhood areas, sorry. And those 4 areas, even if there is a tier 3 resource in them, it will not be considered. So the tier 3 areas will be excluded from those growth areas. This is just a picture of Heinsberg. All of my pictures tend to come from Heinsberg because I spent so long there. And it shows you where the proposed village center area is in darker purple, and then the planned growth area around it in pink. And within those areas, if there's a tier 3 resource, it would be excluded. It would not trigger Act 250 jurisdiction. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to do that. We are on the hook to do a comprehensive assessment of how the tier 3 mapping affects municipalities and regions. The statute requires that we do not have a disproportionate impact on those municipalities and regions. So, we can't shove all of the tier 3 mapping, down here in Windsor area and leave the rest of the state, free to do whatever you want without any Act 250 review. It's got to be distributed. And we're still working on an analysis to show you that, to show you on a county and town basis how much tier 3 area we're mapping. But we're not quite there yet. So more to come. So I'm not going to bore you with the rule, but these are the sections in the rule. This is the second draft. This is really the first draft that sort of was understandable enough to share it with all of you. So we're very early on in the drafting. It is 5 pages. It is not a hard read. I wrote it with the help of our board members, chiming in. Our attorneys haven't been able to touch it yet. So it's just in plain speak. It's approachable. I would encourage you to look at it. It's on the table for those of you that are in the room. And I'll give you some highlights, and then we can talk questions and take comments. So we will be making recommendations to the legislature for any resource area that was not included in the tier 3 rule. So as I mentioned, river corridors, riparian areas, rare, threatened, endangered species locations, we will need to justify to the legislature in a report that will accompany this draft rule why we did not include those. So that'll happen. You should know that this is not a one and done effort. So we're going to do the best we can, and we're going to roll out these rules next year. And then we're going to walk away from them and let them work. But I fully expect that 2 years hence or 5 years hence, we'll be back at it when ANR improves their mapping, when certain permitting or protection measures that we anticipate happening maybe don't, and that warrants additional areas being added. And each time we do that update, we will go through this similar process of public outreach and as much transparency as we can do to make sure people understand what is changing. But I do expect that to happen in intervals or into the future. Another highlight, which is actually in the draft, is that we recognize statewide mapping of resources is not 100% accurate, especially at the parcel level. So, for your 10 acres that you want to build a house on, that we say there's a steep slope with low infiltrating soils that's above 1,200 feet, and it's a headwater area, and it's tier 3. We understand that there are cases where that data may be flawed. And so the draft, as it currently stands, includes a provision that allows a landowner or an applicant to correct that. And if it's an obvious correction, you don't need to hire anybody to make it. It's as simple as pointing it out to our district coordinators that manage our program and saying, look, this says it's a significant natural community and that's why it's tier 3, and it's a parking lot. You got the mapping wrong. That's an easy one. If it's more complicated, the rules include a provision that says you can bring a qualified professional into the equation to explain why our mapping is wrong and why you've got better data to base it on. So this site-specific correction option, I think, is really important because we all understand that even with fancy technology like planes flying over with light beams going down and getting canopy levels, there will be errors. Some of the guts of the rule, Act 250, as I mentioned in a prior slide, does cover subdivision. You do enough lots, you trigger the need for a permit, even before you turn dirt, just because you want to create the lots. We don't want that to be the case in tier 3 areas. We want the jurisdiction to trigger only when there's actually development happening or about to happen. So the draft rule incorporates jurisdiction only when there is development in a tier 3 area. If you were to subdivide a property that had a whole bunch of tier 3 areas on it, the rule anticipates getting what we call a jurisdictional opinion from our district coordinator that would be recorded in the land records that simply says, this subdivision has tier 3 on it. If you seek to develop these tier 3 areas in the future, just be on notice, you might need a permit so that, future owners who are buying into that subdivision have some advance notice. Jurisdictional extent is another sticky issue for the Act 250 program. Generally speaking, when you want to do a project, like I have a 15-acre property, I want to do an auto repair shop on it. That's going to trigger Act 250 in pretty much any community in the state. So I build my auto shop and I get my permit, right, for what amounts to a tiny little slice on the frontage of my property. Well, that Act 250 permits jurisdiction actually covers your whole property, the whole 15 acres, even though the project was focused in just one spot. So if you want to do something out in the back 40, you may need an Act 250 permit amendment. We want to do away with that for tier 3 areas. We want the jurisdictional extent of the permit to be focused on only the area that is only the tier 3 area that you are impacting. So let me give you a couple of examples. If you own that 15-acre parcel I was mentioning, and in the back corner of it, there's a steep slope area, but what you're proposing to build up front is not a auto body shop, but it's just a single family home. Your home is not in the tier 3 area, but your property contains some tier 3. You would not need an Act 250 permit. There would be no jurisdiction because you're not impacting the tier 3 area. I'll give you another example. Same 15-acre parcel, same single family home that you want to build. But let's say that you're on the road and it so happens that it's all forested and we've mapped it as a critical habitat connector area. So the place you're going to build your house is in a tier 3 area. So you go through the Act 250 permitting process, you get your permit, and now you want to do something on the back 40 that wasn't part of, the house that you were building. We want the jurisdiction to stay just with the house, just with the tier 3 area that was impacted. So what you want to do on the back 40 is not going to trigger the need for a permit amendment. So those are a couple of examples to just give you a sense of how we're trying to limit the jurisdiction within these tier 3 areas in a way that's very different from the way Act 250 works today. Exemptions. Act 250, as many of you know, has been a political football for all 55 years that it's been in place. And there are many exemptions written into the statute. Agriculture, forestry are two of the prime examples. Logging, you do not need an Act 250 permit. You don't need one for farming either.
Depends on where.
Unless you're above 2,500 feet, but not a lot of farms up there. So all of the exemptions that are built into the statute and have been sort of accumulated over time with legislative changes will flow into the tier 3 areas. So if it's exempt today, it'll be exempt in the tier 3 areas as well. And some of us wondered whether that made sense because these are supposed to be just the tiniest slice of the most critical natural resource areas in the state. And so there was talk about maybe having jurisdiction apply even to things like farming and forestry. But the way the statute's constructed doesn't give us that authority. And our attorneys have looked into this and made it clear that our authority is to establish where tier 3 areas are and what the rules are surrounding them. But we do not have the authority to change existing Act 250 exemptions. So they must flow into the tier 3 areas. Beyond those exemptions, we've written in a series of tier 3 specific exemptions as well. So I want to be clear. Right now, if you own that 15-acre parcel and it's been in your family for a long time, and you just haven't done anything with it. Maybe you've done some logging, maybe you've just, used it recreationally. Right now, when you go to build your house on it, you go to the town, you get a zoning permit and you build it, and there's no Act 250 permit required, generally speaking. If that same area that you want to put the house is in a map tier 3 area, you will need an Act 250 permit. So that is the change that is happening that everyone needs to sort of be aware of. It's a significant change, but we don't want folks to have to get an Act 250 permit if you're already living in a house that happens to have tier 3 around it and you want to put an addition on. So we don't want to have people need to come in and get an Act 250 permit. If you want to put a 200 square foot shed in your backyard and it happens to be within that tier 3 area, and we don't want you to have to get an Act 250 permit if you're living in your home, whether it's a home that exists today or one that gets built in 10 years, and your wastewater system fails. And the place that is most logical to build your replacement leach field happens to be in a tier 3 area. In all of those examples, that kind of construction would be exempt under tier 3 rules, at least in this draft. So we're trying to build in what we think are practical and logical sorts of exemptions for existing development. Our central tenet is that development that exists today should have a reasonable buffer around it so that you don't need Act 250 for, like I said, additions and general construction. The same goes for roads. We know that over time, Vermont needs to improve its roads, especially in the face of much more heavier rainfall and storms, and the fact that many of our roads and driveways were not adequately built to withstand that level of runoff. We've seen the damage from that. Everyone has over the last few years. So one of our exemptions is that if you are making transportation related improvements within 50 feet of existing road, driveway, or other transportation feature, it's exempt. You don't need an Act 250 permit to improve the swales along your road, to lay a utility line, to add a sidewalk, to widen the road. All of those would be exempt under this draft. So those are some of the exemptions. I will tell you that because this is a draft, there are areas that need more work. And I want to be upfront with you about what those areas are, so you understand that this is not a cake that's been baked for you. This is a set of ingredients that we've sort of set out on a table, and I think they look nice, but which ones we actually put together, we need to do some more work on. The habitat connectors, for example, are probably one of the more interesting and impactful pieces of tier 3 because they're focused along roads. And where does a lot of development happen? Well, it happens along roads. So we know that we need to select the distance within those critical road segment areas, 800 feet, 2,000 feet, maybe something else. We know that we need to refine those buffer areas, and I'll show you a slide next as to why. Trails are another good example. Right now in the draft, existing trail maintenance would be exempt. You want to add new trail up to 100 feet, maybe you need to reroute a section, that would be exempt. But any new trail over 100 feet would be jurisdictional, need an Act 250 permit. We recognize that that's probably not the right trigger, but it was our starting point. And we're getting feedback from the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council and others who create trail systems in this state as to maybe a smarter way to do that. So more work is needed on the trail provision. And as I said, the exclusion areas around our downtowns and villages, at least in this draft, if we stick with that model, will flow from the regional plans, all 11 of them that are being updated over the next year to identify those areas where future growth around our hamlets and our villages might happen. And so we don't know the full extent of those until the regional plans are actually updated, and they're rolling in over the next year. Finally, one area that needs a lot more work is that the statute compels us to do outreach to municipalities and landowners that have and host these tier 3 areas to make sure that there's education about what that means. And so we plan on doing that through the rest of this year and well into next year. Exactly how we're going to do that is an open question. It'd be great to just send a letter to every single landowner that had a tier 3 area on their property. We kind of need to get those tier 3 areas skinny down a little bit more and refined in order to get that list together. And at this point, we don't have a good sense of whether that's 10,000 or 2,000. One is a little bit harder to do than the other in terms of a mailing. So we'll be looking for your help, all of you, to get the word out in addition to the more extensive measures that we hope to do. So the habitat connector areas, they are based on really good data from Vermont Fish and Wildlife, but the current way that we are buffering out that data is problematic. So this is a habitat connector along a road in Sheldon in Franklin County. In the middle of this image, you can see an arrow which sort of represents where the real corridor is. That section of road is a segment that the analysis shows has good forest cover on either side, so it was a high priority section. You can see that it's sort of surrounded by circles. There's little buffers taken out around all the existing homes. So you get a sense of why that particular spot might be important to allow wildlife in particular to keep moving from the habitat on the south side of the road to the north. So the yellow area on the map is the 800-foot buffer around that segment. Not bad in terms of identifying a potential tier 3 area. The green area is the 2,000-foot buffer. And holy cow, do you sweep in a bunch of areas that have nothing to do with that connector in the process of just making a circle. So the black lines show you the actual areas that might be considered for tier 3, both in the 800-foot buffer and the 2,000. The red area shows you areas that are clearly overreach and need to be removed from this particular spot of tier 3 area. So there are, I think, over 1,000 of these particular road segments across the state that we've shown and buffered out. It's going to be a lot of work to go look at each of them and use a consistent rubric to sort of shrink them to a more logical area. But that's the work that I think we'll be doing. And that's just one example of what needs to be done still. All right, I'm almost done talking, promise. So let me tell you where we are in the process. Again, I said the ingredients are laid out on the table. We haven't started baking the cake yet. Since April, May, we've been working with our stakeholders, the working group of 25 and the board to try to come up with a draft that would make some sense. The first one, which I also wrote, didn't. And so, yeah, that's why we're at draft 2 for you. That we're in public engagement right now. We're going to take your questions and your feedback and try to refine the draft over the rest of this year in the hopes of coming back to folks after January to show them where we're at and where we're going. All of that will lead to eventually a set of public engagement and a formal public hearing in May of next year. At that point, we'll be getting public input again, maybe the third time for that. And we will make refinements again. We will then send the finalized version to the legislature. The way that rules work in Vermont is that, the legislature determines the laws, right? But sometimes they give the responsibility to a board to set a rule that will essentially have the same effect as law. In order to have the rule pass muster, a board like ours drafts it with your help, and then we have to put it back to the legislature to make sure it meets the statutory intent. It does not go to the full legislature. It goes to a committee. It's called the Legislative, oh my goodness, it just slipped out of my head. The Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, LCAR is the acronym. So once we hear final public input in May, we'll tune it up, the draft, we'll send it to LCAR, and then hopefully they will bless it and the rule will be approved. This tier 3 jurisdictional provision does not actually start, doesn't take effect until December 31st of next year. So we have a pretty long runway to do this public engagement, to do multiple drafts, to try to get it as good as we can. And even after we go through this process, there'll still be a period of time until the end of next year before it takes effect. So that's where we are in the process. And that's really as much as I wanted to say. I'll just leave this slide up for a little bit because it gives you our website, both for our program and the tier 3 page in particular, as well as a place to email comments and questions to. And really you can email to either our rulemaking web email address, which is shown on the screen here, or me directly. My email address is shown on there as well. And I want you all to understand that we are bureaucrats. I'm just going to cop to that right now. But we are also regular people, and we are full-time staff for the Act 250 program, which means we are at your disposal. So you should feel free to call me if you have a question after this meeting, or if you have a comment, or email me. I will engage with you. It's not going to just go into some formal email bucket and maybe 3 months hence you'll get some reply. you can talk to us about this directly, and I want to do that. So we have a process, we have to follow it, but here's the contact information and feel free to use it. So with that, I will stop talking and it's time for your questions and comments. And I promised Carolyn we'd go to her first. So Carolyn, go ahead and unmute yourself and tell us what you have to say.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. This was so informative. So my name is Caroline Sherman Gordon. I'm the Legislative Director of Rural Vermont, and I also serve as the Commissioner representing youth at large at the Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Planning Commission. And I'm also a small livestock farmer myself and live in Tunbridge, Vermont. And I'm just noticing, you know, Act 250 obviously has like this legacy of originally having intended to keep the working lands open and such. And now with Act 181, it feels like that priority of Act 250 is getting put on the back burner. And I guess my question is, so how does the LURB, when they're recommending the tiers, how do you all factor in the pressure on agricultural land encroaching from development? Because Act 250 already in 2019 has developed this critical resource area concept, and that concept shows actually just even to climate change impacts, we're going to lose 39% of our farmland. And then there's data that we're going to lose 85, or that currently 85% of our farmland is being developed because of residential sprawl. And this is where Act 250 is obviously not grappling. So, and then there's many more statistics about how we actually need to enhance the land and agricultural production to even just produce 30% of the food consumed in the state. So it feels like it was really a miss not to include any agricultural stakeholders in the working group, because I can just say as commissioner, also the regional planning commissions are not planning for protecting agricultural soils whatsoever. It's not delineated on the map where there should be in the future agricultural lands. And all the criteria that inform a development decision are the same criteria that should be used to decide these soils need to be protected for food production. And it seems like that's not being factored in, but correct me if I'm wrong.
That's a great comment, and you're the first person to ask it in 4 public engagement sessions. So thanks, Carolyn. So 2 things real quick. Act 250 currently does protect agricultural soils for projects that trigger jurisdiction. So there is a review criteria, I think it's criteria 9B, in which agricultural soils have to be considered and development worked around them. And Vermont's actually been, as I'm sure you know, pretty successful in leveraging the minor impacts that do happen for Act 250 projects on agricultural soils to then send those funds through mitigation payments to conserve other more advantageous farmland. So there is a consideration for agricultural soils in the Act 250 review process today, but I think what the point you're making, or at least what I'm hearing, is what else is going to happen for agricultural soils, and how is Act 250 being tuned up to address those areas? And honestly, we looked at and discussed agricultural soils as a potential tier 3 area and chose not to include it because folks felt like the existing Act 250 provisions were adequate, and frankly, because the Agency of Agriculture strongly objected to having prime agricultural soils be a tier 3 area that might trigger the need for jurisdiction when it came to actual farming. So we did consult with the Agency of Agriculture. You're right, we did not have sort of an agricultural stakeholder in the tier 3 working group. And I think that was largely because agriculture is sacrosanct in this state. And I think most folks who have been involved would like to keep Act 250 as far away from it as possible, with the exception of residential development that is impacting it. Thanks, Carolyn. I'm going to go on, and everyone can talk multiple times. I just want to make sure we get everyone an opportunity to speak once before we run out of time. So I'm going to stay on the remote, folks. And Lee, it looks like you're next.
Hi, thank you for taking some questions from me. I was actually very disappointed that no interior forest made it into your tier 3 at all. I mean, yes, it's true that a lot of Vermont is covered with interior forest, but there are many grades of interiorness. And if you look at, I think, the Vermont Conservation Design and maybe some other maps too, it shows there are areas of interior forest that are almost unbroken, and they're pretty rare. And I think those ought to be in there because you don't, everything seems to be sort of up for grabs in a way. You just have to jump through enough hoops and not have a long road. But I think those areas should be protected. They're really quite rare, and I don't know why interior forests didn't at all make it into your tier 3. I support the previous speaker talking about agricultural soils. I think in the very long term, when California has become a desert due to climate change, we're going to have to grow a lot more of our food. And, it's short-sighted to not consider agricultural soils here. And I was also disappointed that undeveloped shorelines are not protected because they're pretty rare. And it's if you look at the Vermont, the wildlife, let me think, wildlife action plan. The wildlife action plan for Vermont says that undeveloped shorelines are really very, very rare, and shorelines in general are being encroached upon, developed, made into recreational, blah, whatever, and we're losing them all, and that shouldn't be allowed to happen. We should protect, especially undeveloped shorelines. They're not that common. So I think that is all I have to say. Thank you very much for all your work. I realize it's been a very, very intense and long process, but and I appreciate your work. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your comments. Why don't we go into the room? Does anybody in the room have a question or comment they want to get to? Yes, just tell us who you are.
I'm Doug Tuttle. I'm from Pomfret. Lived here my entire life, grew up here. We're talking about all these protections. It's nice to talk about protections. Let's talk about Act 250 for a second. I happen to have been through that cockamamie mess they call Act 250. It's good for lawyers. Lawyers love it. They make money off it. But when you start putting individual landowners in the Act 250 process, if they go through the bullshit I went through, it's not very pretty, okay? And it's expensive. It's damn expensive. We have a severe housing shortage in the state of Vermont. Every time those people in Montpelier decide to restrict more lands, put more restrictions on them, more costs, which is the Act 250, they create a bigger housing shortage in the state of Vermont. You can't protect everything. We've got to learn that. We've got more forests in this state today than we've had in the last 200 years. All you got to do is fly over in John's airplane and you will see that. We've got a severe problem with where our houses are located. They're located in the village centers of Barrie, Montpelier, downtown White River. Those are the areas that they talk about wanting more development, and they're flooding because we're not taking care of our rivers. The Agency of Natural Resources has failed the state of Vermont because the people have zero common sense, and they're taking their advice from a group of people that got elected, probably most of them from out of state, into Montpelier, to create these laws. The wildlife connectivity, when they brought that to us and they drew a line on the map and said, this is where it is, and it followed parcel lines, which is wrong. Town of Pomfret, we've decided our wildlife connectivity block will be the Appalachian Trail because the Appalachian Trail already has restrictions on it that you can't do anything with. And when you start putting more restrictions on individual landowners in the state of Vermont. It's gonna create a bigger housing shortage, and you're gonna have more out-of-staters. I just opened up a thing tonight by accident. Stowe, Vermont, 83% of Stowe, an area you're familiar with, is owned by out-of-staters. Less than 18% of it is owned by Vermonters. I do a lot of work in Stowe and Morrisville and those areas. Those people have the money to go through the process. The working class Vermonters don't. At some point, we need to get people elected. We need to get people in planning to understand more restrictions and more regulations is just the opposite of what you're trying to do to get working class people into the state. And that Act 250 thing, the 15-acre rule. So my nephew has a garage that sits in a dip, got a big shop. Every bit of his property falls under Act 250 because of that shop. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I don't know who came up with that, and I don't know why they think that's a good thing. I mean, there's a lot of agricultural land associated with that shop, and there's some areas it could be good for residential. It's a large parcel. But because it's 15 acres, every bit of his land, both on that side of the road and on the opposite side of the road, are tied into that process. So don't ever tell anybody Act 250 is good unless you're planning on looking at how you can fix it to make it more reasonable. Because I went through it 2010 to 2013, and I had to hire 3 different lawyers when I got hold of a woman down in Brattleboro. What held me up was a barn that was torn down 20 years prior to that, and an agency that should have absolutely nothing to do with it, historical preservation, tried to swindle $25,000 out of me before they would sign off on the Act 250 permit to get a permit for that salvage yard. That right there is a problem with Act 250 stuff. I mean, I wish you the best of luck, Town of Pomfret. We're gonna look out for the people of Town of Pomfret, not for the state of Vermont, not for the regional plan. We represent the Town of Pomfret, and we're gonna do what we think is good for the Town of Pomfret.
Appreciate the input, Doug. Thank you. Anybody else in the room want to take a crack at it? Yes, go ahead.
Allison Desthappy, Danville, Vermont, and also I'm planning commission chair there. But right now I'm speaking for myself. There's also something I'd like to say from a planning commission standpoint. But first, I just want to say I always had the same perspective on Act 250 of, oh my gosh, what is this? It's a disaster. You always hear all this stuff. And I've come to understand the role that it really plays with development coming in and wanting to make sure that neighbors are involved and the environment is protected. So I do feel that it could be corrected and it could be done right. And I feel like of all, you guys have the opportunity to do this. And I feel you're really trying to do it because one of the things that I know you hear is, oh, it always takes forever. It always takes forever. But correct me if I'm wrong, Brooke, I think you're looking into what actually holds up the process. Is it A&R permits? Is it actually Act 250? And it seems more like it's A&R and it's not Act 250 holding something up. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about Act 250. But the reason I bring this up just as an example, in Danville, we have a quarry and they started blasting more recently. A new owner came in and blasting. And I had people, because they know I'm on the planning commission and I'll try to help them. We had people around there and they were just calling me like, oh my gosh, I've never felt my house shaped like that. I have a window that is broken now that I think because of that. And people come out to my property and they put the things up there, but they won't let me look at the readings on it. So with that 250, it's like, okay, we call Kevin Anderson, our District 7 coordinator, and he's on it. He's like, okay, here's the permit, here's the conditions, we can ask for the readings, here's enforcement. So I think it's not only about, we don't want people polluting the environment and just coming in with all their money and just grow, develop, take over all the land. They're drooling over it. It's gorgeous and we have a lot of it. But it's also about that community involvement and we want to respect and make sure the neighbors have a say. So I just wanted to say like that's something that I've learned over the years of it does have a place, but there's ways it has to be fixed, right? There's ways like you talk about what you went through with the historic thing, but then I looked down in Massachusetts in Beverly, and you know, they put a Whole Foods on this place near the highway and it's literally sinking. And they want to sue the town because they didn't do a soil stability test, which would have been included in something like Act 250. So I feel like it has its place and I just want to bring that to the conversation. And really the reason I bring that up is because I went through a long learning curve with this, but also two last things on it. And thank you. One is, could you just go back to the legislature and say, you know what? Act 250 is a good rule. We have some things we need to fix, but this tier 3, everyone in my town who hears about it, we put out a whole come check out your future land use map. People are flipping. For some people, it's like, this is all I have. I have no money. I have my land. What if I want to subdivide my land? What if I want to do something on my land? So these are the legitimate concerns because a lot of people's wealth is tied up in that. So that's where it's, can you, instead of not doing this place-based, jurisdiction, do the project base. And in a situation, that you brought up about the whole 15 acre, you guys have obviously, I learned about the Stony Brook thing. You're already talking about, oh, here's your development, but this stuff is okay. So I just wonder, could it really do what it was intended to do, environment and community wise, without getting, which would protect critical resource areas already, without getting into the private property? This is all I have. What does it mean when I want to try to sell, or I want to try to do this on it? So I just don't know if that's something that, can be part of the conversation. I know what you guys have been tasked with, and thank you. I've caught glimpses of the work. It's amazing. But I just wonder if you could go back to fixing Act 250
Yeah.
so that it works.
So I want to make sure I don't talk very much so that there's time for everybody to speak, but I do want to address that because it's come up at all of our meetings.
Yeah.
And I want everybody to leave here and understand what we as a board can do and what we can't.
Right.
And so what we can do is make sure that this tier 3 rule is as circumscribed and as targeted and as limited as makes sense to protect the resources and respect private property owners and make sure there's a balance there. What we can't do is just turn our backs and say, never mind, legislature, we're not going to put in any tier 3 areas. Like,
Right.
we can't do that.
Right.
Furthermore, the road construction jurisdiction provision that is going to start on July 1st, need a permit if you're building more than 800 feet of road. There's been a lot of concern about that. We have no power to influence that law. That the legislature made it, and if folks want that to change, you got to talk to your legislator about that. So there are some things we do have the power to get as right as possible, and there are other things that are outside of our power. And I don't want to fool you. You talk to your legislator. That's what they're there for. What I can tell you is that it's my commitment as one board member of 5 that when we finish with this reform effort, the bulk of it anyways, next year, when the tier 3 rules are settled and they're looking to go into place and all of that jazz, my commitment is that we, as an organization, try to fix it. That we spend a year looking at our rules, which haven't been updated in over a decade, to try to find those efficiencies and those protocols where, people have gone through the process and gotten strange results that didn't make sense to them. And that's not to say that intelligent people can't disagree about whether your project deserved the scrutiny it got. Maybe it did in some respects, but I think there are areas that we can improve the program, and I'm committed to doing that. Like in the legislature, I think wants our board to be in that role, right? We're a professional board. We're supposed to know what we're doing, and we bring a lot of expertise to the table. So that's my commitment. And I know that we will be looking at those sort of regular general Act 250 rules and procedures, next year. The legislature has charged us with this now, and we just have to do it.
Just one last question on that. Is it fair to say, and I don't even know if you can answer this or if it's true, is it fair to say that this critical resource area was kind of done as if we're going to do these Act 250 exemptions in these growth areas, this is like our counterbalance? Like, was that, or is there not a real relation?
I've had legislators scold me for saying that.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that that's the right way to put it. I have said that in the past.
Okay.
So you're not the only one.
I wonder.
I think that legislators who are the more conservation-minded legislators feel that sub-jurisdictional projects, so developments that were just small enough to not need an Act 250 permit, have been happening in areas around the state that compromise important natural resources and sort of ecological functioning. And I think they think the problem is sort of death by 1,000 cuts. Like, okay, the big projects go through the review and they get proper design, right? It's not going to flood. They're going to have good runoff. They're not in the most sensitive ag soils or whatever. But you know, that 2-lot subdivision that created that 2,000-foot road that put the mansion on top of the best view in Stowe or Waterbury, like those are all sub-jurisdictional and didn't go through an Act 250 process. And I think that was the intent with the tier 3 areas and the road construction provision, is to try to make sure that the most sensitive resources get some consideration, and that development way out in the middle of the woods, perhaps up a steep slope, you know, goes through a review process.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to the online folks and then back in the room.
Yeah, I don't know why people are not falling off after they talk.
That's okay. We'll
I
just,
think you can put their hands.
we'll keep
down
track.
and do
So,
that.
Rachel, you're up. Go ahead. Unmute yourself and tell us what you have to say.
Hi, everybody. I am Rachel Arsenault. I have well, I guess just a bit about who I am. I'm currently a real estate broker here in the area. I live in Randolph, Vermont. I have a background in agriculture. So to the agricultural piece, I'm very glad to see that that's not being affected and will continue to not be affected. So some of the areas that, and just to know, like, if it matters to anybody, I'm raised here. I'm a Vermonter through and through. The main thing that concerns me with this is landowner rights, right? So a lot of Vermonters, all that they have left in a state that is becoming increasingly expensive to live in is their land. That's the only thing that they have. What do you do in a situation where somebody's land now becomes basically worthless because of new Act 250 restrictions? Who's going to buy that property when it can't be built on, can't do anything with it? And then will their taxes then be reflective of that lack of value? Because as we know, Vermonters are being taxed out of the state. So that's one piece of it, right? The other piece is that in towns where there's no zone, well, for one, I'm not sure why housing is involved in Act 250 at all. So why is it that if in a housing crisis, why is Act 250 even getting into residential housing at all? Like that should be an exempt category, in my opinion, especially when we don't have enough housing for everybody as it is. And then lastly, just to keep it short, I'm just thinking from even the being able to police this in any way, you know, in towns where there isn't any zoning anyway, how's anybody even to know whether this is being triggered or not?
Don't know your Act 250 very well.
Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate your comment.
Refrain from negative comments from people that maybe don't work in the
Let's
industry.
just have one person talking at a time, please, and thank you. And Rachel, thank you for your comments. I appreciate those. I would love to chat with you offline because I think I have a few answers, but not all of them. But I appreciate your comments and thanks for making them. Let's go to Mike. Mike, you're online. Go ahead.
Hi, if it's all right, I've got two very short questions and then a perhaps more in-depth one. The first is there a list of the stakeholders that you invited to be a part of this process online somewhere? And if not, will you commit to putting one up?
It is available on the Tier 3 webpage of the Act 250 website, yes.
Okay. And the second is, what is the deadline for comments on this draft?
That's a great question. There isn't one. So I don't want anybody to walk out of here thinking that by next Friday they have to have comments in or they won't be heard. I'm here to take your comments and engage with you all through the rest of this year as we work on refining this draft and putting something else better together at the first part of next year. So there is not a deadline. You know, if you wait until March, that would be unfortunate. So, you know, reach out, preferably this year, but yeah, there's no fixed deadline at this point.
And then the slightly more involved one, you're talking about restricting activity from 1,200 feet to 2,500 feet. So that was brought up several years ago in the House Natural Resources Committee, and even Eric Sorensen, who authored conservation design, they were speaking specifically, I believe, at that point about forestry operations. Even Eric Sorensen balked at that. The conservation design, which we all know is driving much of this conversation, calls for 6% of the state to be kept in early successional habitat. We are miserably missing that mark. Everybody, for some reason, is focused on old growth, which we're getting. We don't have to put any effort into that. We're going to get it. Will that 12 to 2,500 foot section, will that impact forestry operations? Will there be, are they completely exempt, or will they be drawn into Act 250 review in that zone? Because above 2,500 feet, it's so onerous that a lot of loggers won't bother with it.
They'll be completely exempt. That zone is not an area where forestry would be subject to Act 250 permitting at all.
Thank you. And then I don't want to monopolize time, so I'll go, but I'd like to talk to you offline about what you're contemplating for changes to the trails, because I think that's critical. So
yeah,
thank you.
Appreciate that conversation for sure. Let's talk more, and I hope to have a lot better handle on that come January. Okay, let's go back to the room. Craig.
What protections will Tier 3 offer that the current rules for zoning do not? If a person wants to build a house, build a second house for their retired parents, whatever, you know.
Right. So right now, it's a jurisdictional question. So I think it's important to know that right now there is Act 250 review. And in Tier 3 areas at the end of next year, there will be Act 250 review, and it will be the same review. It's not a different review standard or set of criteria. It's the same review. So to answer your question, it's really about making sure that development in those sensitive areas goes through a review process. Because right now, most development, the vast majority, does not. So if somebody wants to build a driveway and they're going to go slab across a 35% slope to get to that back portion with the great view, there's no Act 250 jurisdiction over that. There would be if this were to take effect with this draft. And through that Act 250 review, we would be looking at things like, do you have the proper drainage? Are you going to have an adverse impact on your downstream neighbors? Those sorts of things. So that's how.
So the same type of development that occurs today can happen if the land is labeled Tier 3. It just has to go through a bureaucracy.
Well, I would like to think that as a function of going through the bureaucracy, the design of that development will be better.
Well, I understand that. That's the hope.
Well, I think that's what our review process does.
That's the hope. However, I have to address the issue. It's been brought up by, I think, Rachel on the link there, that land being labeled Tier 3 and being burdened by this encumbrance will be, the values will be negatively affected. And the return on protection of those lands, I'm not convinced it's great enough for the financial harm that Vermonters are potentially facing.
Okay.
I have a question. If somebody is in an area that's labeled to potentially be Tier 3, and they already have their wastewater permit and they have their potable water permit, and they are in a town that doesn't have zoning, when Tier 3 goes into effect, does all of that permitting just become null and void? Or does it sit there? Is it grandfathered in? What's the case with that?
Yeah, great question. This one came up last night in Newport as well. The current draft doesn't address that, and it needs to. So I don't have a good answer for you because we haven't scoped it out yet. But I think there's different situations, right? Is it an undeveloped parcel that somebody got wastewater permitting for earlier and they just haven't gotten around to developing it? Is it a parcel where the development is partially complete? They put in a driveway and laid a foundation, and now it's 2027. They haven't built the house yet, and Tier 3 is in effect. Is it a property that already has an Act 250 permit, but the development hasn't occurred yet? So all of those are great questions about pre-existing development and when the tier 3 rules would actually trigger. And we need to include that in the next draft.
Yeah, but let me just jump in because the question seemed to incorporate like A&R permitting. There's nothing in Act 250 that would negate any kind of A&R permitting. They are completely separate permitting schemes. Often you will use an Act 250 permit as evidence to get past one of the criteria. For example, if you had an air pollution permit, that would get you over with a presumption that you passed muster on criterion 1 in Act 250. But there's nothing about the work that we are doing that would void any kind of A&R permit. And those are the permits that often establish the basis of the information that's provided to get the Act 250 permit. So I don't want you to think we have any kind of power and control to negate anything over there.
Well, I guess, you know, this question is based on a conversation I had with an acquaintance in a neighboring town who doesn't have zoning. And they have land that has been on they own the land and they're thinking, oh, when I go to retire 5 or 10 years down the line, I'm going to build myself a smaller house, get rid of the bigger house, you know, the classic story. And now they're afraid that their wastewater permit, their potable water permit will be trashed and they will have to start at the beginning and none of it, no, they will be just for more of a loss.
Yeah, so I think Brooke's answer is, no, that will not happen. However, whether they would need to get an Act 250 permit in addition to the wastewater permit that they already have and are holding on to, that's the question that I think the draft rules need to address. Like, if you've already made an investment and you have some level of state permitting, should the Act 250 for a tier 3 area not apply to you? Or should it still? And we need to work that through. We don't have a good answer for that yet. It's a good question though. Let's do one more in the room and then.
Waiting quite a while.
Well, okay, but I'm gonna do one more in the room. And then we'll go. So, right next to Greg. Just tell us who you are.
I'm Tom Charlton. I have a whole page of questions, but I'll follow up with you offline.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom.
I am looking at page 5 of the draft. The construction improvements for transportation as an exemption if it is within 50 feet of a road that already exists.
Right.
How does this affect class 4 roads and rights of way, deeded rights of way that might not be more than a Jeep trail or a farm road, but they do access pieces of land that would otherwise be landlocked?
Yeah, so deeded rights of way that have not been developed, that are just, you know, there, but there's nothing, you know, those would not benefit from this exemption. Class 4 roads absolutely do. Those are generally real things, you know, on the landscape that you can point to and say, yep, there's a road there, or an old road, or a washed out road, or a trail. Yeah, your question about like a logging trace or, you know, a deep path in the woods.
Well,
I don't know.
That's under 150 years, but developed is a little bit. So
Yeah, well, that's a good comment. We'll think about that, whether we can clarify that in that section of the exemptions.
And I encourage, and I know that tier 3 mapping is not necessarily the same as reforming the process.
Right.
The Act 250 process is prohibitive cost-wise and time-wise for your area median income Vermonter. It is a process that becomes a roadblock if you don't have deep pockets. The typical working family around here can't pay mitigation fees. They don't have funds to pay somebody else to spend 50 to 100 hours on the project. And it has created an economic disparity in how it functions.
Right.
It's the same process for everybody. It sounds fair, but it's not an accessible process for everybody. So this is something, if we're going to go tier 3 mapping, and a lot more people are going to be affected by this, in fairness, and I agree with the realtor, we need to address that.
Gotcha.
This is going to affect the market values which will be affected in the assessments eventually, which will have an effect on our education fund down the road. And it will mean the rest of us are going to pick up the revenue that's lost when their appraisals go down. So we need to look at this from a fiscal direction as well as the mapping and the environmental.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Yeah, let's go back to the online folks. It looks like Jay, you're next up.
Hi there. My name's Jay Majowski. Can you hear me?
We sure can. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm a resident of Athens, Vermont, and I build trails. The organization I've been involved with owns more than 3,000 acres in 6 towns in southern Vermont, and we have 28 miles of hiking trails. And we have complied with Act 250 to the fullest extent we can. We have 6 permits and amendments, and the last one is took a little bit more than 8 months to get through the process. And I was a bit surprised when I heard you say that you'll offer exemptions for trails that are over anything less than 100 feet. We're in a situation now where we have a trail that I'm going to have to go through an Act 250 process for a trail that's about 1,500 feet in length between 2 trails that are already covered by Act 250. And I think I'd like to be able to talk with someone about how you arrived at that 100 feet exemption versus anything less, that kind of thing. It seems it needs more work.
Yes, and if you didn't hear me say it before, Jay, I agree. It's one of the areas that does need more work, and I would appreciate chatting with you to get your perspective on how we can tune it in. And I mentioned earlier that the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council, reached out to me last week and had very much the same reaction. They said, we've been tracking this. We don't think you have it right. And so I sat down with them and we had a conversation, and they're sort of working on their own ideas of how we could improve it. But I'm happy to talk to you as well. It sounds like you have a lot of experience in the trails department, and managing 6 different Act 250 permits is no small thing. So yeah, let's talk.
So would I be able to do it with you directly through email? Would that be
Yes.
the best way to do this?
Happy to talk on the phone, or if you want to go back and forth by email, that works too.
Okay. I think what I'll do is the organization that I've been involved with may want to actually register some comments about that rule. And I'll ask our executive director if we can come up with something and send you our recommendations.
That'd be great. And if your
Okay.
organization wants, a little bit of FaceTime, let me know and we can schedule some sort of, meeting, remote or otherwise. And I'm happy to pop into one of their meetings and answer questions.
Okay, because I suspect most of the land that we own, it's all under conservation current use, and it's probably all going to be in tier 3.
Yeah,
Thank you.
those items don't determine tier 3 at all. So take a look at the mapping, which is on our website. If we have time at the end, I actually want to show you the map viewer. But thanks, Jay. We're gonna move on to Brittany. Brittany, you're next.
Hi.
Hi, Brittany. Go ahead.
Hi, just a question on the uniformity between municipalities. I see, some municipalities have little to no tier 3 at all, where there's many municipalities that have a good percentage. When you said it's 6 to 8% of the entire state, just a concern. And also something to look at is those municipalities that I've looked at that seem heavier on the tier 3. How much of those lands that aren't tier 3 are already in land trust or restricted in some other way? And then just to touch on the gentleman that talked about the access or the deeded access, I'm kind of in a similar situation. I have a legal trail that has many homes and could have more, but that it's showing under the road rule. And who could I talk to maybe look at perhaps finessing our map or looking at my municipality?
Right. Well, why don't you start with me since I'm here, and if I can't answer the questions that you have offline, I can direct you within our program to someone else who can.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go online one more time, and then we'll go back to the room. Brooke, your fingers sort of covering up who's next. So it looks like, yes, Bill, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
You need to unmute yourself. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you for this presentation. I just wanted to offer a couple of comments. First of all, I want you to know that our town is very much in support of the road rule. I know you're getting a lot of pushback about that, but we are really counting on that taking effect. In fact, our planning commission talked about it. We decided not to address it strictly because Act 250 is going to work with that, and we feel Act 250 is more qualified than we would at the local level. We have an issue here where our remaining large parcels are being bought up by individuals with significant means, and they are putting in large driveways to access their new homes, and they're not even getting to development board review because they're not doing a subdivision. So our zoning administrators are forced to issue permits for driveways that are a quarter mile, half mile, sometimes 3/4 of a mile long. And we really have no recourse. We can't change our zoning that quick. And the second thing I wanted to mention is we feel our tier 3 areas are underrepresented, and I don't know if there's a method for us to provide input to expand those areas. And out of curiosity, I'd like to know how the board has incorporated Act 59 and the 30 by 30 rule and the 50 by 50 rule. Are they represented in these tier 3 areas, or do you feel that they don't quite match up?
Yeah, so real quickly, Bill, the mechanism to try to get Charlotte's planning with regard to areas that you think should be added to the tier 3 areas, the mechanism is just talk to me, email, call, happy, like I told the last fellow that, to attend one of your planning commission meetings and chat about it some. I know Charlotte's done a lot of great natural resources work because I used to do planning in the community next door. So just talk to me and we can see, maybe there are elements that could be turned on within Charlotte, and potentially that would be statewide. We're not probably going to do it for just one town. So that's the first thing. And yeah, your second question just slipped out of my head. Sorry.
Act 59 and the 50 by 50 goal.
Right. Yes. So the short answer is no. There is not a relationship between this work and Act 59, which, for folks who don't know, the numbering was a law that passed that requires the Agency of Natural Resources and the Vermont Housing Conservation Board to come up with a plan to ensure that we have 30% of the state in conserved status by 2030 and 50% of the state in some sort of conserved status by 2050. And by conservation, that doesn't mean in public ownership. It means a wide variety of things. It could be a privately held land that has a conservation easement on it. Maybe it's a farm, maybe it's a working forest, could be public land. So it's a variety of things. Anyways, no, we don't have a connection with that. But I will tell you that Trey Martin from Vermont Housing Conservation Board is on our tier 3 working group, and it has come up. We have talked about it, but I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that there's some clear connection between the two, because there really isn't at this point. And that Act 59 plan is very much still a work in progress. It's coming soon, but it's very much a work in progress. What we're doing is much more circumscribed than that larger vision effort.
Well,
Thank you,
I just
Bill.
wondered could I just follow up? You know, I look at the 50 by 50 maps that they have, and I'm curious if they align with the tier 3 maps that you have, and maybe I just want to make sure that they're considered, because to me, they should overlap.
Yeah, well, we're talking to each other, but they don't overlap, not at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll go back to the room. Yes, just tell us who you are. Go ahead.
Rich Holshoe from down the river, on top of Scott, Brattleboro. Couple of specific questions based on your presentation. You mentioned that using high priority wildlife connectivity areas with priority covered 60% of the state, if I remember correctly. And then you used an intersection with roads to narrow that down.
Yep.
To 2 to 6% remaining. What happens if you add the priority connectivity areas, not high priority, add the priorities back in and use the road filter?
Yeah.
What happens there? What's the change?
I can't give you the numbers, but I did do that. I was walking down that road, and when I looked at the map and sort of walked through the state, you know, with a map, it was substantial. It's a lot of additional areas that would be jurisdictional.
Okay.
And more importantly, I understood why Vermont Fish and Wildlife wasn't recommending that, because the connectors, as they're mapped in the current draft, do a pretty good job of ensuring connectivity will remain over time. And adding the priority areas, it does add more connectivity, but it doesn't appear, just from a sort of landscape level visualization, to be necessary to ensure that connectivity remains over time. So I'd be happy to walk you through that, you know, like together with a map, just so you could see some of that. And I might be able to do the numbers for you to sort of, you know, see what that amounts to, but I haven't done it, and I don't have them right now to sort of share that with you.
Okay. Another short question. Given that Act 250 was developed to fill shortfalls in existing structures back when, there is an exemption on the books for construction within 50 feet of an existing road. Mentioned toward the end there, that's one of the regular exemptions.
Actually, no, that's one of the exemptions we are proposing that would be new for tier 3 areas.
Okay.
It's not a current exemption.
Well, question's still pertinent. That access, that proximity to a road corridor has been proposed in the past to be exploited as a loophole for infrastructure projects such as pipelines and utility rights of way. The New England Clean Power Connect coming from Champlain across the state to Ludlow was going to follow roads specifically for that reason. And it seems like something you should be aware of.
Okay.
Because that's a mega scale project.
Yeah, good comment. You're right. Under the current draft, it would be exempt.
Yeah.
Because we don't really define utilities or attach a scale to them.
It's the difference between a road as common usage, serving the common good, and utilities being private corporations.
Right.
Right, but don't forget, I mean, if it's a commercial project of, you know, large enough beyond 1 or 10 acres, depending on where it would be caught by Act 250 anyway. That's one of the puzzle pieces that we've been trying to, every time we're talking about tier 3, we also have to do it with the backdrop of what will be triggering jurisdiction anyway normally.
So it might not trigger tier 3, but it would trigger Act 250 in general.
If it were
maybe, but there's also a factor of whether it's a utility that is exempt from Act 250 and is actually reviewed by a completely different process through the public.
PUC or something.
Yeah,
it might be the PUC, or if it's deemed commercial, it would be, you know.
But I think your point is a good one, and thank you. Yeah. Any more, Rich?
This might be just too broad. Given that 250 was put in place to fill gaps that were perceived, and part of that 250 process brought in citizen comment, at least in major permits. When you were looking at required areas, categories to examine, the legislature gave you a short list. You blew that out to 17, went through the list, cut it down to 5, essentially 3. And because there's agency jurisdiction, existing oversight already.
Right.
Do those existing oversights have the same degree of citizen inclusion? Have you lost that? Like kicking the can down the road?
Yeah, I think the short answer is no, they don't have the same level of citizen participation. I think I want to not disrespect the Agency of Natural Resource. They're a partner in this process, and I think they would say that there are opportunities for citizens to be involved in those permits that they issue. But in no way is it like the Act 250 process where a citizen board holds a meeting and invites through public notice, neighbors and other interested parties to sit at a table and get a presentation and make comments. That's not the way those other agency permits work. Yeah.
And there are about 80 different permitting processes at A&R, and they do vary widely from just being able to put in a public comment or just receiving notice of something with no ability to intervene.
Yeah, some are pretty perfunctory.
Yeah.
And I also just want to add to that, compared to the PUC process where there's so many lawyers and legal work and all of that involved versus the Act 250 public, easier public process to come to. It seems like a big difference.
All right, we're gonna stay in the room. Yes.
General comment.
Just tell us who you are.
My name's Chris Lang.
Thanks,
resident
Chris.
of Norwich. I'm also a real estate broker in the state of Vermont. General comment, observation, you get what you wish for. Last week I was in South Burlington, hadn't been up there in a couple of years, and driving down the street just north of the grocery store, I could have been anywhere USA. All I could see was stripped blue sky with developments on either side that had to have gone through Act 250, entirely different from the Vermont tradition that I grew up with. And at the same time, in our area, the hill farm tradition is, been around for hundreds of years. It's a reason why people use hill farms. I think that reason today with climate change is even more important. And those farmers aren't just living off the fields, they're living off the woodlands. They have family traditions. Many of them don't have their land enrolled in current use because they don't want to be told what to do. And if you want to keep young Vermonters, there's a lot of them that are involved in the ag industry and the forest products industry. And I think you have to keep the land accessible to them. And we have to be mindful that some of those tier 3 areas, just because they're high country above 1,200 feet, just because a portion of it may have steep slopes, it's important to be aware of those traditions. And my last thought, which is, I don't know how you came up with 200 feet on a square structure below that. I see a lot of Vermont land trust easements. They allow for an 800-foot cabin to be built up in the woods. I think the tradition of being allowed to just go up and build a deer camp up on your land should be maintained. And I think you should reassess those square footage.
So you'd like it to be larger?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. That's specific. Yes, right behind. Yes.
So I'm curious, John and Chagria from Stratford. I'm curious how you came up with a 8% figure for the percentage of the Vermont land mass that would be designated tier 3. And as sort of background to that question, I just want to observe that this whole exercise is a product of, as I understand it, of a sort of grand political compromise, which was Act 250 is going to be totally revamped. Significant portions of the state were going to be deregulated. Act 250, right? Either completely deregulated or the local option. And development would go forward without any impediment from Act 250 whatsoever, with the goal of encouraging development and subject to local zoning and so on. But that's a significant change and promotes development in particular areas. And in addition, incidentally, undoubtedly confers an economic benefit on landowners who found themselves with developable parcels that no longer were subject to Act 250 jurisdiction, a kind of a windfall. The other side of the political equation, as I understand it, was that Vermont, and I think you expressed that the thinking of certain legislators as well, was that the state was going to double down on the protection of rural areas that surround the developed areas that we wish to conserve and we wish to protect, and to apply the Act 250 jurisdiction more intensively, more broadly, in order to preserve the rural countryside. And that was a conscious trade-off, right? And it was not so much, it was a policy trade-off, it was also a big political trade-off. It was only as a result of that political trade-off, as I understand it, that this legislation got enacted and we are now going through this exercise. which leads me to the question I posed to you, which is why 5 or 8%? Listening to you, I heard that you said, well, we could include this resource, but then that would be a really big number. We thought about that resource, but then we put that aside. But I thought the subtext of what you're saying is tier 3 cannot be a really big number. It can't be minuscule, but it's got to be a manageable number. So I get the sense that the board has been operating an assumption that tier 3 has to be a certain size, a certain percentage of the state is deserving of tier 3 designation, and it can't be a great big number. If somebody came in from Mars and looked at this program and say, you've got tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, why don't you divide the state into 3 equal portions? A third in tier 3, a third in tier 2, and a third in tier 1. I mean, sort of but for instance, am I right in detecting that the board, your group has an idea of how big tier 3 ought to be, and that your judgments about what resources to include or exclude were all evaluated in the context of the question of how big we going to let tier 3 become?
Yes. Short enough answer for you?
No.
Okay, well, I'll expand. We don't have a number. None of us have a number that we're shooting for. That wasn't part of the criteria for either including or excluding a resource area. But one of the criteria was that it had to be targeted. And it couldn't, because most of Vermont is a beautiful, ecologically functioning landscape, most of which we would all like to see properly protected, with allowances for development, but, it doesn't go off on the rails. But this is a jurisdictional question about an Act 250 permit. And for the purposes of that conversation, we felt that identifying a resource that occupies 60 to 70% of the state was untenable. And that if we had a resource that deserved protection that constituted that much of the state, well, we better drill down deeper and do more work to figure out what portion of that resource is the most sensitive. Critical natural resources. That's what the legislature gave us our charge to identify. Not natural resources, but critical natural resources. At our first public engagement meeting in May of this year, which I imagine none of you were at, but it was when we sort of said, hey, we're going to do this. Anybody care? We'll come back later. That was the question that came up. Somebody said, what is a critical natural resource? Do you have a definition of it? And I had to look at him and say, no, it's not defined in statute. It's not defined in our existing rules. We have to figure out what that is. And so part of the rubric for us was how targeted is the resource? How much of the state does it cover? Is there good mapping for it statewide? Do we only know about it in Orange County, but we have no idea in Washington County? And are there other permitting processes that already do a decent job of managing and protecting it? And there were some other rationale, but those were some of the 3 core ones that allowed us to winnow the list from what could have been a very large swath of the state. Like you said, maybe we could have done it evenly. A third tier 1, a third tier 2, a third tier 3. I don't think I would have followed that Martian's instructions, but if we did, it just wouldn't have met those criteria. So that's how we got there.
And let me just give you my perspective. I was a practitioner representing applicants or neighbors before Act 250. To me, the most important thing was something that was going to work, that was a bright line, that was not going to create more uncertainty and litigation around fighting over, what the definitions are. Or for me, it had to be able to be implemented in a consistent and very clear fashion. The last thing I wanted to do was to further complicate Act 250. So for me, everything that Alex has talked about, one of the things, because I've been spearheading the appeals study, we hear over and over, why do we have to go to Act 250 and to A&R for what's perceived as the same thing? If we get an Act 250 permit, why can't we be exempted out of, one versus the other? So I did not want to see anything that duplicated effort. So if A&R adequately permitted a particular thing, then we should not duplicate that effort if we felt that we were comfortable and it was sufficient. So for me, I wanted to make sure we didn't create more of a burden.
Isn't that the legislature's choice was in certain areas of the state to impose a greater burden on the owners of land in those areas of the state?
It was definitely their choice to impose proper design and a review process for development in those sensitive areas. But they punted on where those areas were and how to define what the jurisdictional limits were. And they gave us that power. And that means you have that power. That's why we're here tonight. Tell me what the rule should and shouldn't say, and we'll do our best to address that in a practical way. The legislature couldn't do it. It was a political football, and it was a grand bargain to some degree. 10 years in the making, from when the first commission on Act 250 was formed. So we're at 8 o'clock. We should be done. And at all the other sessions, I said, hard stop at 8, we're done. I'm not gonna do that tonight because people have more things to say. But if you want to leave, please grab a piece of pizza if you're in the room or a donut and walk right out the door. You can always get in touch with me. You don't have to be here, but I want to make sure everybody has a chance to be heard. I think Jennifer online, you're our next contestant. Right, we haven't seen the maps yet. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Thank you, Alex. This is my second session that I've attended. And I really appreciate the presentation and the incredible engagement from Vermonters. I'm so proud to be a Vermonter. I live down in Shaftesbury, Vermont. I am a real estate broker, and I'm the 2026 president of the Vermont Association of Realtors. And I'm extremely concerned. And I just, I went today to our local chamber's presentation by the Vermont Chamber. And some incredible conversations came out of that legislative luncheon. And one of the examples that a local business owner shared was his experience with Act 250, which I could see his blood pressure rising as he was telling the story. And, he's been trying to expand his business into an adjacent brownfield that has been abandoned almost my entire life. And it would create 25 new jobs, it'd give a better customer experience, bring in tons of new income to the state of Vermont between sales tax, income tax, property tax. But Act 250 has been holding it up. He has spent $900,000 on the process thus far, including a required study about bats, which are non-existent there apparently. And the process is just not following the actual statutory requirements. And instead, the district commissioner or whatever that body is has been applying rules arbitrarily, creating obstacles that are unnecessary and very expensive. And it's pushing them to the brink of giving up, where they will leave the state and sell their business and then grow their business in nearby New Hampshire instead. And we just can't afford to lose investments like this. And I understand that is an example in not a tier 3, but to everyone like Doug in the room who expressed their absolute distrust of the Act 250 process because of how extremely onerous it is. It creates obstacles that are just making it impossible for businesses and housing to be developed. When there's an opportunity for a project and you find out it's going to have Act 250 jurisdiction, more times than not, buyers walk away. They say, I'm just not interested in going down that rabbit hole. And we are further dividing, like other commenters have said tonight, the haves versus the have-nots. The only people who could entertain going down the rabbit hole of Act 250 are people with deep pockets. And it sounds to me like a lot of these tier 3 areas with the family farms and the camps, and these are just not all people who have those kinds of resources. So I have a lot of concern about adding Act 250 required permitting for people in these tier 3 areas. It absolutely will impact their property values. And I appreciate what you're doing to gather all this public comment. And I hope that these comments are reflected in the revisions. Thank you for letting me speak.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Kudos to you for coming to more than one of these. Impressive. For those that are interested, there was a question from the front about maybe if you want to look at a map. Sorry, I should have done that early on, but I felt like my presentation was long. Can I put one up? Would you like to see one? Okay.
You want to take the question then?
No, actually, I want to show the map because I think most people are looking for that. So hold on. I'm going to share my screen and this will be quick and then we'll get back to any further questions or comments. Okay, so here is our website. That's what it looks like. Just do a Google search on Act 250 Vermont and you'll get there. It's easier than giving you the web address out of my mouth. But on this website, you scroll down, it gives you an intro, it talks about these meetings that we're having, gives you summaries and recordings, blah, blah, blah. Down here under materials and resources, there's the presentation I gave tonight. There's the draft of the rules that were handouts in the room if you want to take a look at them. And there's the Tier 3 map viewer. So that's what I want to show you. You click on that, you get to this. It looks like a map. On the right is a box with map layers over here. And what comes up automatically is an outline of the state. You zoom in just a little bit, and the Tier 3 areas will pop up. And on the right, in the map layers box, you can turn on and off various layers. So you can see, which one's which. And you can click on this little legend to the right of the layer to tell you, well, what color is the headwater streams area? They're the mint green ones. So you can turn them on and off, and you can zoom in. So if we want to just walk over to Windsor, where we are, actually, I have a window where we're already zoomed in. Boom, there it is. So here are the Tier 3 areas for the Windsor area. And you can see what I hope for everyone who lives down here is pretty obvious. The mountain has a lot of steep slopes on it that are between that 1,200 and 2,500 feet of elevation, and that's what's in mint green here all around. Additionally, there is a habitat connector on this road segment here. Otherwise, Windsor is largely devoid of Tier 3 areas. In the red crosshatching, you see an approximation of where the downtown and village areas are, that if there happened to be a Tier 3 area, it would not be jurisdictional, it would be excluded. So one more thing on this right side of the screen, several map layers to play with, turning them off and on. Down below, there's reference areas. Note that it says not Tier 3. Do not get confused when you turn this group of layers on. It is not Tier 3, but we thought it would be helpful if you could see it backed up against Tier 3. So if I turn them on, you can see in red the areas that are 2,500 feet or higher. So those are the areas that are already basically Act 250 jurisdictional under the rules today. And in bright orange, you see those high priority connectivity blocks that help form the rationale for the habitat connectors that are part of Tier 3. So you can see that there's a large area of that around the mountain. And then on the other side of the road, connecting over towards New Hampshire, there's another block. And that's why this particular road segment has been identified as an important habitat connector. As you zoom in to an area, you can see that the Tier 3 area related to that habitat connector has holes in it. So when Vermont Fish and Wildlife mapped these things through Vermont Conservation Design, they put a buffer around all of the houses that showed up on their E911 database at that time and said, we recognize that these areas are not critical for connectivity for wildlife. They're already impacted by those home sites. And so they have been cut out and would not be part of the Tier 3 area to begin with. And here's where you can see that differential between the 800-foot habitat connector radius, which looks like this in yellow, and the 2,000-foot radius, if that's what we went with, in green. And we have not decided what that distance should be. So that very quickly is what the tier 3 maps look like. You can zoom into your town. You can turn on parcels so that when you zoom in far enough, those parcels will show up. Sorry, turn them on. So that you can actually click on a property and say, hey, this property is partially in tier 3. What is that property? Sorry, need to select the right one to click on. So sorry, live mapping, always problematic, but you'll be able to click on a parcel, see who the property owner is and where that property is. So again, these are a combination of tier 3 areas and reference areas to help orient you to what you're seeing on the map.
Alex, can you correct me if I'm wrong? It was my understanding that there's been comments around the fact that these maps were never intended to be used in a regulatory capacity.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So Vermont Fish and Wildlife has repeatedly expressed concern about the fact that their data could and is now proposed to be used in an Act 250 jurisdictional, question. I don't have a good answer for that, except that it's the best data we have, and wouldn't it be a shame if we used bad data to come up with these maps? The idea that they have done the work to exclude existing home sites and focus in on the most important road crossings and delineate and prioritize habitat blocks throughout the state so we can be circumscribed about which areas we include. We need to use that data. It's the best we have. And that's what, in the end, the Agency of Natural Resources said, is that Vermont conservation design wasn't intended for this use, but it's the best that science has to offer in Vermont right now, and we're going to use it.
Do you think that it will help with a housing? Like, do you think that this tier 1A, 1B will actually encourage or help with housing?
Yes, I don't think that's tied in directly to this tier 3 conversation.
No, I was just curious in general.
Yes, and I think many folks tonight have explained why, right? Act 250 has a stigma associated with it. I'm new to the program. I get to say that, right? I haven't been working Act 250 for 20 years. I know that. I felt the same way when I was in municipal government. And so removing Act 250 jurisdiction on those tier 1 areas, I think will have a real effect on how much housing we create and how quickly we create it. Are we going to solve the housing crisis within the tier 1 areas only? I doubt it. I bet you we're going to do most of our work there. But I think all these concerns that are being raised about the need to still accommodate housing in other parts of Vermont, not just in the tier 1 areas, it's a good point. We need to make sure it's still possible to build houses outside of those areas. And that's why we're working as hard as we can to be as specific and as targeted as we can with these tier 3 areas. So they're not willy-nilly across the landscape. They're focused on just the most important areas.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Well, I want to make sure we get comments from anybody else who hasn't spoken, and I don't think Stephen has. So Stephen, go ahead. I'm going to stop the share. I can put it back up if you want to see it again.
All right. Well, I have an initial distrust of the A&R maps anyway. But when you did the animal corridors, particularly along the roads, did you have like the local forest rangers add or delete or define the corridors? Or did you just go with the A&R maps and the plane?
We went with the A&R data. Yes. No. So there hasn't been local level forestry folks looking at these maps, at least not yet. We are open to taking feedback from anybody who feels like they have good data or good perspective to share on how to refine these habitat corridor maps. As I explained earlier, we have a lot of work to do to sort of slim them down and make sure they are indeed focused on the areas where there is good forest cover on either side of the road. But if you have ideas on how we could do that or want to recommend people we should talk to help us, happy to hear them.
Well, I
Can
just
I make a
suspect.
comment?
Whoops. I was just going to say, I thought the local forest ranger might have a feel, like if there's a bear corridor and bears have been getting killed crossing this road, they would know, that kind of thing. As compared to it.
I think that largely that information flows from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the game wardens that work for them. And that information is flowing to us through A&R. They reach out within the organization to sort of understand that. But I don't want to fool you. I don't think that every game warden has reviewed these maps and provided input. It's just part of their overall agency effort.
And the other question is a play on sort of what you alluded to when you were talking to about new tier 3 Act 250, where it would only be in the area that had the being affected, like the garage, like be the 1 acre lot where the garage would be. We ran across somebody that had an old paint shop that closed 10 years ago, but all 70 acres were under Act 250 rather than just where the paint shop was. And is there a mechanism within Act 250 to take it down to, let's call it, the 1 acre lot where the old paint shop was? Because the rest of it was farmland. And right now it looks like you can't. It's nothing to do with tier 3. I understand that.
I know, but I understand the question. We talked about it a little bit early on. As a part of the tier 3 rule, we are trying to have the jurisdiction attached just to the paint shop. So in terms of this expansion of Act 250 permitting, and that's what tier 3 is, I'm not trying to hide that. We're trying to have it attached just to the paint shop. But again, my pledge to you and everyone is that in the years to come, I want our board to work on that bigger question of how do people get out of Act 250 permitting. For example, what if the paint shop that was subject to the Act 250 permit, which I think is what you said, no longer exists, and it's now a parcel that has nothing that would trigger Act 250 today at all. And the only reason that parcel has a permit on it is because of the paint shop that ceased to exist a long time ago. I can't speak for the board, but I can speak for me as one board member. I want there to be a way for that property to get out of Act 250 jurisdiction, to exit. And I'm like I said, I pledge, over the next couple of years to push that issue and see if the board can improve on that. Thanks, Stephen. Yes.
If you rely on the current jurisdictional administrators to do that, they're very closed and tight with their own jurisdiction, and they'll be very strong to say that they want to have regulation, they want to control everything. There's numerous examples we could give.
Oh, I understand.
We've gone through this process before. And John Bassett, real estate broker also. And I go back to the time where I was creating 799-foot roads with 4-lot subdivisions. And I know it was largely a deterrent against speculative land development. That was largely the reason why they created the rule there. So it just didn't turn into a cookie cutter thing. It is very clear that the development cost creep is going to happen. And so the questions will be the legal lawyer for a buyer who wants to buy a property is immediately going to go to any transaction we have and say, where can you prove me that tier 3 jurisdiction is not applicable to this? And so in the same way we have a flood zone law, and we are now going to have something like that if we're not careful. And I think aside from, and I've heard both sides of this, we have the sort of personal liberty rights side of this, and I want to be an environmentally conscious and save things. I think the burden on the landowner is significant, and there will be a cost. And what you're really saying is if a person wants to put a driveway in of 825 feet on their own personal property, and they're not subdividing it, they will be subject to Act 250 jurisdiction. Yes. And that is a real significant step that is invasive in what historically people have called sort of personal property rights. And there's definitely a legal stigma associated with properties that are under Act 250. Most of the lawyers that do real estate are not, they would tell their buyers, stay away from it. as far as you can. And then two quick comments. If you have an 800-foot rule, and I don't like the 800 to 2,000 thing anyway, but if you want to at least logically tie your 800-foot jurisdiction to your 800-foot driveway, then very few people build 800 feet farther into a property anyway. And so to try to cover all of that is problematic. Your 800-foot road rule gets you back to protecting that property, at least to the latter half of it.
Yep.
And so I guess I could go on, but I think if you, as a board, my question would be, who is going to jurisdictionally oversee the Act 250 process under Tier 3? Is it going to be the people that are there right now? And if it is, that's problematic. I would strongly suggest that you fight tooth and nail to keep it narrow in scope, very defined, and you go as best you can in jurisdictional approval process, like a zoning, an administrative permit, rather than the whole ball of wax here, because it's perpetually land grab with people that I deal with all the time. And it varies depending on the jurisdiction. You can go to Windsor County is going to be different than Cheshire County. They will give different answers to these questions.
I appreciate your feedback. The only thing I want to say to that is our current structure, which has district coordinators, full-time staff around Vermont who help landowners, work through the process, and then help staff the district commissions who make the decisions on these permits. They're not going anywhere. They are still the people that are going to make these jurisdictional calls. So if you don't like what they're doing today, it's good to know that, because they're still going to be there making those decisions in the future.
Then make it very tight.
Yes, so that's where I wanted to go with that, is that our job as a board is to make sure that the rules are tight and that the way they're applied by our staff and our district commissions is consistent. And that was something that was part of the Act 250 reform effort overall, is people said, we're getting different opinions from district coordinators in different districts, district commission decisions in different parts of the state don't really line up. And it's our job to make sure that doesn't happen, to improve upon that.
The town of Hartford, for example, will require someone to hire a designer to create a driveway to figure out flow and capacity for something that's 150 feet long. And if they don't like the 15-inch culvert, you can say, let me just put in an 18-inch so I don't have to do this.
Yeah.
No, that's not good enough. They need it designed and fully designed, and that's what we're going down. If you go down long driveway permits, where the state is now regulating a person who's not subdividing the property, they're just building for themselves, and that's intrusive.
Yeah, understood. Yes.
I think you're, John Moore, Pomfret, I think you're missing that you mentioned that the tier 2, tier 3 is a beautiful place, and it's a nice part of Vermont. It's the majority of Vermont. And the reason it's that way is the landowners are taking care of it. And, this whole Act 181 is a micromanaging, fixing a problem that wasn't broken. And so I hope that, for example, in our town, it's 80% forested. When I was a kid, it was 80% open. And it's 80% conserved, and it's 30% conserved, 80% current use. It's a wonderful, wonderful town. And, this whole thing about habitat connectors and interior forest parks, it's crazy. Put it on a map, it doesn't mean anything. It's 80% forested. They're going to go where they want to go. And so, it's just, I hope you push back with the legislature when it opens up in January and try to push back some of these things, because we're going down a road that's not going to work.
I appreciate your comments, but I want to be perfectly candid with you. We're not going to push back. That's not our role. Our role is to implement what the legislature gave us as best we can with your input. So I have my own opinions about what you're saying, but that's not our role. So I'm going to put it back on you. That's your job to push your legislators to have those conversations and change policy if that's the way, that's what's best for the state. So,
We just need more us than you.
If you look at that wall right there and turn around and talk to that wall, you'll get a better response from that wall than you'll get from the three judges that represent Windsor County. I'm gonna tell you that right now. And that's a fact. They're lunatics.
that's politics.
Yeah,
People
they
get
are. That's
elected
why
and
they're
elections have
politicians.
consequences. We all know that.
We own guns.
Anybody have a parting comment before we disband? Because it's almost 8:30. It looks like.
for all your work.
Yeah,
Thank
sure. Jennifer, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. It's just a perfect segue from the last speaker. I just would really like to see, how can we get people in these district roles that want to get the projects to yes, instead of this long, frustrating, confusing, expensive process. Why not embrace a fast track guided, expedited process with reasonable fees? We all agree that there's a housing crisis. We all agree that we need smart commercial industrial development in order to be able to help take some of this property tax burden off of hardworking Vermonters. And it seems like those people in the district positions carry all the power. Are they appointed by the governor? Are they hired by agency commissioners? Like who decides who gets those roles, and are they for life?
Yeah, so just to clarify, our district coordinators are staff. They are state employees that are hired by our program to help everyone involved in the process, landowners, developers, neighbors, work and get through the Act 250 permitting that they need to do. It's the district commissioners that make the decisions. The coordinators have a lot of, they're really important, but they are facilitators in a process that the district commissioners make actual decisions on real applications. Those district commissioners are not appointed for life. They are appointed by the governor for a specified term. And I hear you about our district coordinators and perhaps the perspective or sort of mentality that they have regarding strict adherence to all of the criteria for all the projects that come in front of them. And I'll just tell you that, Brooke and myself and the other three board members, it's our job to understand our program and shape it so that we can have Act 250 working better, so that hopefully someday, people are not afraid of Act 250, but actually appreciate what it does for this state. And we're committed to doing that, but that's no small order. And we're going to do it over time. I'll just tell you, for me personally, and you can talk to anybody in Heinsberg. I bet you some of them will disagree with what I'm about to say, but I worked there for 22 years helping local landowners get through the municipal development review process. And the first thing I asked every single applicant was, what do you want? What is your goal? How can I help you get to yes? So that idea is not foreign to me. And I do want that to be a philosophy that we have in our program. But I am one of 5 board members and I don't, control everything. So I'm just giving you my perspective on that. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think we are way over time. So I'm going to say thanks again. Thanks for coming. Go to our website, look at the rule, send me an email, give me a call. It's work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Happy birthday.
Who told you that?
Thank you.